We're taking a ThinkPad T43, a computer made all the way back in 2005, and hopefully bringing it back from the dead. I have hardly any experience with board repair, but I'm gonna give it my best shot. All this and more, I got a lot of ground to cover in this one, so let's go. Alright guys, I'm gonna be honest with you, I definitely have a problem, and that is I cannot stop buying ThinkPads. I know it's kind of a joke and it's rather silly, but honestly, I really do have a problem. I seriously cannot stop buying these computers, and I don't even really know why. I found this T43 on Facebook Marketplace for $30 with shipping. I don't know if you guys understand how much shipping costs these days, but it was probably at least $15 to ship this to me, so this is really like a $15 computer. What's even more crazy is 17 years ago, when this computer came out in 2005, it cost $2,049, which if you also adjust for inflation since 2005, this computer would have been $3,108 in today's money. These numbers tell you a lot of things, not only how bad inflation is, but also how far and quickly we've come in terms of personal computing. Now, the condition and quality of this particular T43, I'd say, is in pretty good shape for being 17 years old. It's not showroom quality or new in box, and I'm sure you can find a bunch of other vintage ThinkPads that are like in perfect condition, but I'd say for 30 bucks, this is looking not that bad. Even though it is not a shining, immaculate example, I think the quality is very high up there, especially given all the others that I have seen that are much worse for wear. The details of the listing were not super complete, although it did show a picture of the computer powered on, so I knew at least the screen worked and the computer booted. Or at least that was what I was led to believe. This is actually my second foray into board repair, and this was my first, which is the ThinkPad X31. I spent an entire week trying to diagnose what the problem with this board, because this computer was working just fine for many years. I thought it was the capacitors, so I swapped those out, but that wasn't the problem until I finally figured out through voltage injection that this was the issue right here. This is the southbridge chip, and because a bad keyboard was plugged into it, it popped one of the circuit traces underneath that chip or embedded inside of it, so unfortunately this isn't something I can repair. That's actually what prompted me to purchase this T43, is because my X31 died and I really didn't feel that great not having an older vintage ThinkPad, so here I am buying another one. When I first opened the package, I did power it on, and this is what I was met with. Pretty much the IBM ThinkPad boot screen just stays there, and then nothing happens past that point. I tried everything to actually get it to boot, and then I started searching on forums and all that, and that led me down to the rabbit hole of the southbridge chip on this computer. I had tried everything up to this point, removing different components, trying different RAM configurations, but ultimately this was the test that it led down to, which is if you press physically on the southbridge chip, it will actually make it work. Thanks to a very old Reddit thread, there were some people talking about this being a potential cure for this particular issue on this particular computer, and lo and behold, it actually was the problem. After physically pressing on the chip, I was finally able to get it to boot to BIOS, which I had never done previously, but then if you look, I'm pressing on the arrows and nothing is working. So depending on if I'm touching or holding the chip, that means that it's going to work, and if I let off pressure, it's not going to work. I could get it to have some states where if I let off it still worked, but this was only after it got past the boot point. I was never able to get it to boot and have it be in this state. I seriously couldn't believe that this actually worked, because I had never fixed a computer by physically squeezing a component on the motherboard. On that thread, there was also some discussion and speculation as to why and how this happens on this particular laptop. They were saying either through flawed manufacturing or just heat cycles over time, there can develop micro cracks underneath the southbridge chip where the BGA solder joints are. And this speculation does correlate with the solution, which is applying pressure, because that would close any gaps between the chip itself and the motherboard, or any micro cracks or any kind of separation going on. If you squeeze it together, it's going to make better contact. You can see when I'm booting and not applying any pressure to the southbridge chip, none of the buttons on the keyboard actually work. The ThinkVantage is supposed to take me to the BIOS, but that is definitely not working either. But once I apply pressure, it starts to work. This also makes sense for what's going on, because the southbridge chip is responsible for a lot of the lower level functions of the computer, such as the USB ports, keyboards, mouse, all that stuff. So now that I've pretty much identified the problem, or at least this problem that this computer is having, how am I going to go about fixing it? Well, the easiest method is just to get something to constantly apply pressure, closing those gaps, and you could do that with something physical. Some users on that Reddit post said all they did to fix it was stuff a bunch of post-it notes on top of the southbridge chip and wedging it between the bottom of the palm rest, and that was enough pressure to get it to work consistently. And while that is a very quick and dirty solution that is surely to work at least for a little bit, I don't believe that it would last very long, especially if you're moving your computer around or pressing with a lot of pressure on the wrist pad, so I didn't want to go that route. I'm looking for a more robust and reliable fix for this, so that's what I'm going to attempt now. Now mind you, this is only the second motherboard repair I have ever attempted in my entire life. The first being that X31 motherboard that I showed you earlier in this video that I wasn't able to repair because the chip itself, the southbridge chip, was physically damaged. It is technically possible to swap a southbridge chip, but that's not something I feel comfortable doing, because even the experts, it's like a 50-50 chance if it's gonna work at all. To do this repair, I just read one forum post and I was like, yeah, I could probably do that, so here I am attempting it, and the steps are pretty easy. The first step is to run a ring of flux around the southbridge chip where it meets the motherboard. You set your heat gun to 200 degrees Celsius and you melt the flux just enough to start seeping underneath the chip. You want to take your time at this point and try not to apply too much heat to the chip. You just need enough to start getting that flux to flow underneath it. You also want to set your fan speed very low, because you don't want to start blasting components off of your motherboard. After you have your flux seeping up underneath the chip, you're going to set your heat gun to 350 degrees Celsius and then start heating up the chip. You want to keep your heat gun moving the entire 5 minutes. You don't want to leave it in one spot. You want to try to apply as much even heat as you possibly can. You want to get the chip just hot enough to melt the solder underneath, but not so hot that you're going to damage any of the components. I highly recommend at least using aluminum foil as a heat barrier, but you might want to do even more than I did, because I did melt a few of the plastic parts and I don't want that to happen to you. 5 minutes is a long time when you're dumping this much heat into your motherboard. Just make sure to keep moving the heat gun around, don't leave it in one spot, and it should be good. As I said before, I have almost zero experience with board repair, and I'm doing this off of a 3-sentence instruction that I read on some forum, and I'm just trying it out. I didn't even own a heat gun. I bought one specifically for this project. You're gonna want to wait till it's completely cool before attempting again. Here I am waiting after 2 hours. I'm just testing it, and as you can see, it actually did something when I pressed that ThinkVantage button, and this was an agonizingly long time, and then I got this, which was amazing. It had never done that before. I actually got a CMOS battery error, and I also was booting to BIOS without any pressure on the southbridge chip. I was super excited and I honestly couldn't believe it, so I was very skeptical that I had just fixed it, but I kept booting and it kept consistently going either to BIOS, and I actually got it to go to this, which is operating system not found, which makes perfect sense because I have no hard drive installed, so I was super happy to get to this point. I couldn't believe it. I honestly couldn't believe it, but I was super happy to get to this point because I at least was consistently getting it past that boot screen, and now it was going to the BIOS, it was going past the BIOS, so at this point I was feeling pretty confident in how this computer was going to work. I figured at least it was working well enough to this point, so maybe it was a good time to clean up some of that excess flux and maybe even start putting it back together. Now with it all back together, I am consistently getting this check your date time, which to me tells me the CMOS battery is dead, so it's not retaining the clock. I'm also now getting this error, which I had to look up, which is actually a Linux error, so that leads me to believe that this hard drive might have Linux installed on it. Since I was getting tired of seeing that date time check every time it booted up, I decided it was a good time to replace that CMOS battery. I was gonna buy one, but then I remembered I have an X31 which has an identical battery, so here I am just sanity checking with the voltmeter, and I am seeing 3 volts on the older X31, which probably that battery was replaced at one point because that computer's from 2003, and then on the battery on the T43 that is showing 0 volts, completely dead. This was a completely easy fix. Just pull out the old battery, check it, put in the new one, and you're good to go. The only issue was that when I was heating up the motherboard so much, I did melt some of the plastic right there. You can see me trying to adjust it with the pliers. The plastic did warp a little bit. It's not enough to not hold the battery anymore. It does hold it, but not as well as I'd like, so I'm just adding some tape, but I realize I don't really need the tape because it does hold it well enough. Do I wish I hadn't warped this plastic? Yes, but it's not the end of the world and you can't really see it, so I'm not too bothered by it. That warping also caused an issue in the front where it didn't want to close exactly as it used to, but I was able to kind of squish it into place, and you can't really tell it all with it all screwed down, but you can definitely tell when you're trying to reassemble it. I don't even know if this is completely avoidable just because how much heat you need to put into it. Maybe I could have done a better job with my isolation of the chip aside from the motherboard, but I guess if you're going to attempt this, then just be very cautious of all the other plastic pieces around the southbridge chip. Once I was able to get further along in the process of setting up this computer, I realized that it was having some issues with the thermals. I couldn't really install Windows because it would get to a certain point in the install and then just kind of lock up and freeze, and I figured this might have something to do with the thermal management because both the CPU and GPU get very hot and that could be causing a problem. So all I did was swap out the very old thermal paste. I know for a fact that was never changed. It had been 17 years with the same thermal paste. Although sadly the paste I used to replace it wasn't probably that much newer and it wasn't ideal, but it was better than what was in there, so I'm probably gonna redo that again with some even better thermal paste. And I was finally able to install Windows XP. I can't even tell you how much the nostalgia hit me when I first was installing it. It had been a long time since I installed Windows XP that wasn't in like a virtual machine. I can't even really describe the feelings of installing Windows XP on native hardware because I have done this so many times in my life when I was younger and it just really brought me back. And now the question is this computer that's 17 years old even usable in the modern day? And I would say probably not. I mean, technically it is, is, but not really. You saw me right here lock up from overheating from just playing a 144p YouTube video. It literally could not play it. Just even loading the YouTube website without playing a video, that's using like 70% CPU usage. This computer even has a dedicated graphics chip and ATI chip, so it's not even like it's all on the CPU either. Even just playing a song from SoundCloud, not a video, one song is enough to push this computer to 60 to 70% CPU usage for playing a song. I did want to show you guys a comparison to a more modern computer, but also a very low power one. This is a ThinkPad X31E, which has an AMD E350, and just playing a song, it's about 60% CPU usage. It can actually play videos, and this is about 60 to 70% CPU usage. This computer is 6 years newer, which just goes to show how much progress had been made since 2005. This computer came out in 2011. It'll play videos, it'll play music, no problem, but not so much on the T43. I was finally able to get you guys a song playing on SoundCloud on this computer, and as you can see, it's bouncing between 60 and 80% CPU usage for playing a song on SoundCloud. Now, this probably doesn't say much about playing MP3s because I know this computer can play music no problem. It says more about modern browsers and modern websites and how much they chew up your CPU. Now, as long as a computer doesn't overheat and get too hot, it does function perfectly well, it boots every time, and it is reliable. It really could just need some better thermal paste, which I am going to do, but it also might be an issue with the ATI chip because there are known issues with chips at this era and vintage of ThinkPad. It did take quite a bit to get it to this point, but I am very happy with the results, and to me it was totally worth all the effort I put into it. Now, is this a computer I'm going to be daily driving or even using all that much? Probably not. If all you were doing was writing a book or writing some code, then I definitely think you could still use this computer in this modern era, but there isn't a lot of support unless you're going with a more modern browser for just applications and everything, really. Although that's not really the point of this build. It wasn't to make a modern computer or even upgrade one that I could use daily. To me, this is like a snapshot in time, and I am very happy just to own it. Like I said before, it had been a very long time since I installed Windows XP on a native system that wasn't a virtual machine. There's something to be said about running through the Windows XP installer and then finally seeing that bliss background when you get to the full installation. I don't know what it is, maybe it's just of the era. The nostalgia, it hit me pretty hard. In my youth, I can't tell you how many times I've installed and reinstalled Windows XP. It's probably in the thousands. This computer and this brand specifically come from an era in computing where things were built to last and there wasn't really a planned obsolescence. At this time, the things that were making computers obsolete was the dramatic increases in technological advancement. There aren't a ton of computers from 17 years ago that are still functioning today, but I'm thankful that this is one of them. I want to thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. This was my first ever board repair video, and I hope to do more in the future, so stay tuned and I will see you in the next one.